Today's September 18, 2024, and I'm honored to have with me economist Arnold Kling. Arnold, tell us a little bit about yourself and what's been captivating you lately.
Okay. Well, my background is in economics. I feel like I've broadened that out to the topic of human interdependence. And, but I've only been sort of writing and doing that kind of stuff for about the last 25 years. When I finished my PhD, I went to work at the Federal Reserve, and then I went to work at Freddie Mac before it became famous. Then I started an internet business, and after selling that internet business, I went into high school teaching and have been doing writing since. And so my current writing is on the Substack, but along the way I wrote several books. So that's general background. What I've been interested in lately is just the sort of the topic of how it is we decide what to believe. There's a lot of talk these days about misinformation being a problem, and I can sort of think of two types of errors that we can make relative to sort of the elite consensus. We can sort of uh, overly censor people who disagree with the elite consensus, or we can, that is, repress, sort of useful information that's outside of the elite consensus, or we could under-censor it. We could, people could believe crazy things and conspiracy theories, and, sort of how do you minimize both types of errors? I don't have the answer to that one, by the way. Maybe we'll come up with something. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about.
I like that. I think the answer tends to kind of self-divine over time, based on success. I mean, people, I think, for the most part, would rather have food than not have food. They'd rather have friends than not have friends. They'd rather, have peace than war. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously. And some people are in the war business. Some people are in the, making fun of people business. Some people, so forth. But and I'm not sure who's in the starvation business, but I think people will want to self accommodate to a better outcome overall. So if they can understand what yields better outcomes, my own sensibility is that concourse discourse will lead, and kind of, I guess, to an understanding of what the other people are going through in a party to your dispute and so forth, leads to better outcomes. But it may be that not everyone wants a better outcome all the time. I was mystified in 2008 when Obama, I guess 2009, he came into office, and there was this, I guess, there was the housing bubble crisis and all this kind of stuff, and he just went about, I guess, printing money. It's like, it didn't seem like an obvious way of fixing this crisis. It seems that it made everything worse. And I'm wondering, when we talk about misinformation, the pervading thought I have is that some people don't really want to get at the truth because their own truth doesn't stand up to the truth.
Yeah, well, that's a disturbing thought. But yeah, there. One big reason for not being a pure truth seeker is tribalism, and that's, in a way, the psychology behind my book, The Three Languages of Politics. That what I noticed, this was a little over 10 years ago, it just occurred to me as I was reading political punditry and so on, that people were not trying to change anyone's mind. A pundit wasn't saying, conservative pundit wasn't trying to say, fellow conservatives, we need to change our mind. And they weren't trying to speak to liberals and say, liberals, you should change your mind. Instead, it seemed like they were trying to close the minds of the people on their own side. So that it's true that there is a lot of uh, rhetoric or punditry out there that is not does, does not have a truth-seeking motive. And so, what's the motive? And a lot of it, I think, goes back to sort of tribal loyalty, people uh, being loyal to a tribe, and that's kind of a disturbing or frightening thought, uh, because that all of us can be subject to that. All of us want to belong to groups and feel like there are groups of people that care about us. And so if for all of us, it can be uncomfortable to say something that contradicts the view of our tribe.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, it also seems that in the course of our discourse, there are, kind of potential. When I say foreign, I don't mean necessarily foreign national, but interests that are foreign to what theoretically was our, say, national intent, national spirit. Um, there's an aspect. I forget. It's Peter Schweitzer who's been writing on this, but others as well. That the essence of TikTok lately has, it has an internal. It has a different name in China. I forget. It's not TikTok. It's like Dao Fei or something. I forget. But the types of things that they allow to go through are different from those that our youth get. Say, I think they're in both cases they're youth oriented, but in China, they something that has the kind of manual how to trans yourself, how to pursue kind of a quote unquote sex change surgery is very much promoted here, and it's not seen at all within China. Now, that's not misinformation. I mean, both case. I mean, in certainly it's information to put it in front of kids, and kind of the pornographic aspect. A lot of things are kind of allowed and encouraged, and in our schools, for instance, what's been called book banning in states like Florida is not really book banning per se. Nobody's banning the book from general consumption. They're taking, say, oftentimes gay-themed quasi-pornographic titles from public schools, which is kind of a filtering or a fencing in of what is allowed and not allowed. But other actors, in this case, we'll just stick to the TikTok example. It would seem that it's not just election interference; it's kind of a general societal disintegration strategy that's very effective when taken over the long term. So this kind of gets back to my earlier point that not everyone wants a positive outcome. And in the information sphere, there may be other actors that are external to your not just your own tribe, but your own set of tribes within your own national narrative. How do you conceive of those things, and how does it all play into what's information, what's misinformation, and how do we all try to filter it on a regular basis? Somebody's driving a cab and can't really discourse on this and doesn't have a PhD in it.
Well, that's a challenge. If I had a good answer to that, I'd be great. But the the processes that we've come to think of as working, something Jonathan Rauch titled a book, "The Constitution of Knowledge," and the idea is that these ideas would be contestable, and they're contestable within some traditional norms and institutions, like the scientific norm or the courtroom norm or a free press norm. And but what we've arrived at today, I think, is a lot of people think that those institutions can be gamed or have been gamed. So, for example, in academia, there's just it seems like a freezing out of conservative points of view, to the point where progressive points of view that seem absurd and you would think in a fair fight would just disappear, become widespread. and conservative points of view that you would think in a fair contest would hold up reasonably well are just not allowed. So anyway, it is a difficult problem. I guess that's where I come out. I feel that um, we need to somehow remake or rebuild institutions and norms that get us back to kind of a fair marketplace of ideas. And one of the challenges is in the world of the internet, people are bombarded from all sorts of sources that they weren't bombarded before. Like you say, Americans, young people now are getting information that's filtered by the Chinese government. That's just not a problem that we had to face, 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I was listening in the car to it's a comedy channel. It's different from radio, I guess. It's kind of podcast-ish. Tesla has their own kind of channels. You get, kind of pre-select what you're going to listen to. It's a little bit different from the old days of radio, where you kind of have things coming at you from all places. Anyway, this comedian Tiffany Haddish, I believe, and I believe she's a American Black. The thing was labeled free education, and she's doing this. It's a 2-minute routine or piece of it, and she's like, "I got into NYU," and everyone's like, "Yeah, you're all clear, cheering." She's like, "Hey, don't clap. I didn't go because I didn't really see a need for that, and I'm not going to put $100,000 whatever down and like that. I just I didn't see why. And she, she's kind of heavily accented. She's kind of like, I didn't really see what need for it was and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, and you want education, it's all right there. It's like, I go to YouTube, I want to know this. I just, go look it up on YouTube and it's not there. I just ask somebody on YouTube and they make the video for me like next day, and it's a very reasonable point. I mean, she was, making light of it, I guess, but it's something that, I wonder about a lot. Like, why do we still have these things called four-year colleges? The Alan Turing experiment, is like, can you just see if there's a sentient being on the other side of this set of questions? That's the so-called Turing machine, which is different from what I used to go on vacation. Like an airplane was another kind of Turing machine with a no in there. Anyway, but the answer for every question is 4 years. You want to become a French professor, 4 years. You want to become an engineer, 4 years. You want to become a barista, 4 years. And it can't be right. I mean, there's no sentient being like predetermining, tailoring something for you. Whereas on YouTube, that's all it is tailoring. That's all they do is they see the kind of things you like, see where you're going. Make a redundancy, they pre-anticipate where you're going to go next. They're anticipating. And it's not bad. I look at some chess puzzles and I spend time, I guess, puzzling over those. And then boom, on my feed is chess puzzles and math puzzles. And this, it's like, dude, you might like this. It's very interesting. And a lot of times it's much better than the stuff that you kind of get, pâté de foie gras style and like shoved down your throat in say medical school first couple of years or whatever. And some of which, I wound up using here and there, but most of it, which I never did. It just seems like the education model should be much more kind of on demand, and as you go, kind of just in time. Do you see any of that happening out there? Where, I mean, I know it exists, these kind of Coursera courses and people learning on the job, literally. Do you see any kind of like shift towards kind of a reassessment of credentialing according to more kind of certificate based rather than baccalaureate?
I think it's not happening as fast as I would like it to happen. There's just a lot of inertia in the current process. What I think you mentioned the word credentialing. What I tossed out on my Substack at one point, it's like, if you look it up, it's sort of said of Arnold Kling Network University or something like that. Just let's start with the fact that we have the internet and this ability to communicate across long distance, and also uh, the ability to learn on your own, to sort of explore topics on your own. What can we do with that and still provide the equivalent of credentials? So what I suggested is sort of a network university where you would have mentors. Yeah, that's it. You would have mentors who might very well come from the business world. The output of this process would not be a degree or a grade, but instead your mentors would be able to give you letters of introduction and letters of recommendation. And uh, so the benefit that you get now from grades and degrees, you would then get from these letters of introduction, letters of recommendation. Um, and but the learning process would have two components. One is sort of uh, learning on your own with some direction from mentors, but using all these resources that we now have, from YouTube to Wikipedia to Chat GPT. I mean, there's just incredible resources out there. But then what uh, what's important is an in-person experience. And the the hypothesis I have is that we do not need a continuous on-campus in-person experience, and that's an open question. I could be wrong about that. But what I've suggested instead, if you were having a network-based university, is that you would get people together almost like for corporate retreats or summer camps or something for, let's say, 3 or 4 days at a time. You would take a cohort of students and mentors, bring them together for 3 or 4 days of intensive interaction, not lectures, not seminars, but things that get them to know each other, so that when they disperse, they know each other well enough that they maintain contact. They've developed that their friendships develop more as they operate remotely. Anyway, so that's sort of one vision for radically changing education, but I think it's due for a radical change, and it's not just college that's due for a radical change. I think there are people who would argue that K to 12 also could use some radical change, and some of those changes might be throwbacks to prior forms of education, like a one-room schoolhouse type of situation where uh, you don't have this heavily bureaucratized, uh, almost centrally planned education system, but you have more localized education in K through 12. But I do think those are areas that are ripe for much more rapid and much more radical innovation than what we've seen so far.
No, I agree. I think a fair amount of elementary school, middle school education is uh, more feminine in a way than masculine. There were various junctures through my older son's education where they wanted to tag him. I mean, I think it's very easy these days. I think probably both of us are old enough to remember a world before the term ADD. And I assume the human model was reasonably the same, that our brain template and whatnot. And there were kids with, what are all called learning issues these days. I mean, we have an enormous number of administrators in school. This is a slightly separate topic. I can maybe show the slide. But administrators have hugely outpaced the number of teachers, and same in actually medicine. As a side note, that administrators have gone up while the number of physicians haven't, per capita, over the last number of decades. But as far as the kind of male female model of school, when boys get together, typical game is like King of the Hill, determining who's in charge, who's the boss. It's very competitive. And girls' prototypical game, and I know that everyone wants to break these gender models and whatnot, stereotypes, I guess, but I think they're reasonable facsimiles. Girls get together and like the having tea together, having a social civility, and having all your stuffed animals around the table, and you're all conversing and having a meal, all that kind of stuff. They are much more kind of, I guess, consensus builders, and guys are competitive, are kind of winning builders. And when you get in school, what are you doing? Which one are you doing? You're sitting around and having tea for the most part. Yeah. You have to wait your turn, answer when called, and kids that are disruptive are medicated, and I think we're having a secondary aspect of this, which is kind of underparenting over time, because they're much more fractured households. And when I grew up, almost every kid in my elementary school came from a married couple's household, and I think that's in my leafy suburbs that's probably still pertinent, but I think overall it's kind of a coin flip. Anyway, as far as educational models, I think your point about K through 12 is apt. I think there are ways of dealing with these so-called learning disabilities. I'm sorry to digress, but one example I had with my older son was that he had a hard time sitting in front of the computer, or sitting in front of a blank piece of paper with a pencil and doing that thing that they asked him to do. It's homework, write about this and that. But I had dictation software, 40 years ago now, and I used it to kind of accelerate my, having to do medical charts and whatnot. And a lot of people had dictation servers. I just had a dictation program, and we would go for a walk. I'd ask him what the topic was, and he would have lots of thoughts on whatever it was. Let's say, why aren't giraffes in Australia, or whatever, and he would have, he'd be able to discourse. So I started just taking, I started recording him. I think it was pre-smartphones, but I started recording him. Then we'd come back and we'd upload the thing at the Dragon and would transcribe it. And then he had a working model of what to say. And then all he had to do was kind of pick it around. It were his thoughts. And then he'd kind of put them places, and he learned how to use the dictation software as a kid. And he would talk his, written work and so forth. I mean, it didn't have to be written. It's just his thoughts. And they were fine. And that was like an accommodation. We just did one-on-one. But he never had a problem with his essays and so forth after that. But, that's not something school thought of. And they're just different ways of applying answers to the problem, but it doesn't seem to really happen that much. Again, all they wanted to do with him was medicate him. They're like, oh, he can't, sit and do this work. He needs amphetamines. It's just like, first of all, the whole concept of amphetamines, which have clear tachyphylaxis, you get addicted to them, and then they stop having their effect. And insofar as its effect, it's probably the first 3 weeks. It's a whole kind of like, castle built on sand to begin with, which hasn't been washed away yet. That's a whole separate topic. But the concept that there's just different ways of getting people to get to goal, it doesn't seem to be something that occurs in kind of this very standardized, top-down public school monolithic model.
Yeah. Going back to something you said earlier on the male-female model, have you ever come across the work of Joyce Benenson? Benenson. The title of the book is Warriors and Warriors. You can probably find it. You can probably find a review of mine that I wrote of it. And it describes differences between boys and girls in the schoolyard very much as I remember it. That is, recess would come and the boys would run to the far end of the playground to play softball or kickball. The girls would more hang closer to the teachers and do, something that's was more social, not as competitive. And you do see those differences in style showing up in school. And I think some of the changes that have taken place in higher education kind of reflect that you have um, uh, sort of you've gone from the warrior mentality that dominated the elite schools to the worrier mentality that uh, that now dominates them, and that's why there's uh, less kind of open intellectual combat going on and more sort of repression of disapproved beliefs in higher ed. So it's yeah, that um, so it's a that's just that's kind of a very interesting topic in itself. But yeah, I think again, I think there's a real gap between sort of the potential opportunities to really rethink K-12 education and kind of the stability of the current system. So anyway.
That's an interesting point. I was unaware of that book. Where does she actually come down on that? Warriors and worriers. Hard to say 5 times fast.
Yeah.
Warriors and warriors.
Um, just a lot of interesting things um, that you know it's if you go back to sort of a primitive tribe, the men are sort of jostling to sort of decide to sort of determine who can best and how they can best protect the tribe. And and so they actually become very good at cooperative competition, as it were. Sort of uh, sports and that sort of thing, sports and games. uh, Women, to survive, uh, you know their bodies are very important to them. Their bodies are going to carry their children. Their bodies are somewhat fragile. And so the notion of a warrior is that they have to worry about threats to their physical safety and physical well-being. Um, and um, so she ties in sort of evolutionary psychology and just her own observation of playground behavior. So you get, on the playground, you get boys and girls before they've really been externally socialized, and they can just behave as they naturally do. And you do get these general tendencies. Obviously, you get, there are some girls who gravitate to sports, in elementary school, and there are some boys who gravitate away from sports into other things. So this is not, the stereotype is just general. It's not 100%. But anyway, so I found it a valuable book.
Yeah, no, it seems that way. I'd have to take a look at it. Not promising to read it, but what we see, in a sense, with the political parties, is a masculine-feminine divide. I mean, literally, the
Yeah.
predominant candidates for president currently are, female on the Democrat and male on the Republican. This is a reprise, I guess, by accident perhaps, but of the 2016 election. But even so, 2020 as well, it's kind of clear as like a masculine model and a feminine model running. And I don't think it's a shock to say that, the Democrats garner more of the, women vote, kind of paraphrases, quote unquote, single cat ladies and whatnot. But, leaving that, quasi epithet aside, what you're talking about in the realm of male display or male pattern behavior is this competition. That's essentially the free market, which I prefer as a term over capitalism. Is letting these ideas battle amongst themselves, and the best company win. May the best modality. It's going to be horses or cars. Which is it? It's going to be Betamax or VHS. Which is it? It's going to be telephony or telegrams. I was just reading an article about AT&T, and at the onset, their second T is for telegram, American Telephone and Telegraph. Yeah, and they early on had to divest Western Union, and so they were actually disappointed about losing that second part of the second T there, because they didn't think telephones were really going to make it, because mostly people were telephoning within like a 1 or 2 mile radius. It was all kind of these group calls and whatnot. I just didn't see any place for that. Whereas telegraphs were very direct, kind of the precursor of the fax machine in a sense, targeted messages or texting even. And they thought that was going to be the predominant method. Anyway, but there's kind of like the battle that's going to happen, and people put their money. The whole stock market essentially is putting your money and trying to figure out the bets. Whereas in a sense, the kind of corporatism that Democrats have been using, and maybe the Republicans would if they had the power, who knows? But it's kind of like a annealing, an agglomeration, a coalescing, kind of more a feminine thing of everyone kind of getting together and producing something, which I think has its vast inefficiencies. And whether it's the school system, we're all going to just have this one kind of blob, teach people whatever. It seems like these models could coexist, but they don't. And where do you think they're going?
Yeah, well, with my background in economics and perhaps with my gender, I'm a big fan of competition in ideas and economics and so on. And my big fear of anything like industrial policy is that that what you're doing there is you're putting faith in the expert, in the technocrat, and there are all sorts of reasons not to do that. I've even written recently on my Substack about that the problems of technocracy, they include a selection problem, in that even if in principle there's an expert who knows what they're doing, what you select for ultimately isn't expertise, it's overconfidence. The person who sounds like they know what they're doing gets ahead of the person who knows what they're doing, because the person who knows what they're doing is going to be a little bit unsure of things. There's this famous economist, Thomas Sowell, who says that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Well, no politician wants to hear that. They want to hear there's a solution. And no one in the public wants to hear from a politician. I imagine Thomas Sowell getting up at the presidential debate and saying there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Oh, no one wants that. But that may be the best experts may have that kind of humility, that kind of honesty and humility trait. But they're not going to be selected to be the technocrats. But then even the best technocrat is not going to have all the knowledge. So you have the next problem, which is knowledge problem. And then finally, you have a problem that economists call rent seeking, which is a term that conveys nothing. I call corruption. That may be an extreme. Maybe the best term would be gaming the system. That is, if once government sets up a regulatory system, then it's up to the regulated entities to try to figure out how to take advantage of it, and then how to avoid being punished by it. So the classic case is financial regulation, where the regulated institutions like banks try to use the regulations as best they can to get private profits and socialized losses. And they seem to do an amazing job of it time after time, because the regulators just cannot overcome that natural incentive. So my view of going back to 2008 and the financial crisis that led to Obama, throwing taxpayer money at people and setting a precedent that that Trump doubled down on COVID and Biden tripled down on, of just throwing money at people whenever there's a problem. But that financial crisis, was a case of the regulators designed a system, and the banks and so-called shadow banks came up with a way to game it so that they could earn short-term profits over and over again while building up huge amounts of risk. And that's that kind of gaming or corruption or whatever you want to call it is kind of inherent in these attempts to use regulation to fix problems.
Right. I think the gaming thing is quite apt. Humans will. I think we have a very interesting algorithm. We want to get things, but we also want to do as little as possible to get those things. Obviously, there's kind of your circle of who's part of you. There's you, then there's your, say, family. Well, that's younger, it's offspring, your siblings and whatnot, parents. Then becomes your wife or your spouse and kids. And then the next, there's like rings outwards from that family to, say, friends or neighbors. And then, kind of affiliates, people who agree with you, so forth. But, insofar as you can, you will work those things, and then you'll come up with a reason and rationale why it was the right thing to do. And it leads to widespread corruption. I think, to your earlier point, we have these factions and we have teams in a sense, and a fair amount of debate just has to be, I think it's similar or akin to the level of, Yankees fans versus Red Sox fans or whatever the rivalry is. There's not necessarily always a deep difference of ways of looking at things, but oftentimes it's just like with whom you identify and which team you're on. I just put that up for sake. Some of the crises which don't necessarily flash across right-left dichotomies. Like you'd think that the Democrats historically would be. Everyone kind of paints the Republicans as more warriors and whatnot, but the wars tend to get started on the left. It seems now. Trump had 0 wars started, and the Biden administration has been very Ukraine gung ho. And it doesn't seem like an obvious match to have the Democrats so belligerent against Russia. That just seems to be kind of a team thing. I think it seems kind of odd to me that they were so kind of bending over backwards always to explain away the problems of the Soviet Union. And when it became Russia, all of a sudden it became basically the enemy that should have been the Soviet Union. The way they should have felt about the Soviet Union, they seem to feel about Russia. And it just seems to be kind of team stuff. And I don't think they have a really great rationale why they're so belligerent against Russia. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the way kind of information, misinformation comes along and how it kind of maybe accelerates or aggravates the way that you cannot reach a consensus, the way that you cannot kind of come to terms and peace in that particular area. I don't know if that's a lively or interesting topic for you.
Well, I guess all I might say about that is I think I divide people along on their foreign policy views on 2 dimensions, whether they're idealistic or realistic. Idealistic being, above all, we've got to do the morally right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Realistic is, hey, it's a tough world out there. We just got to, take care of our interests, and we don't have the luxury of being moral all the time. And then the other dimension is, should America be assertive or have a low profile? And I think the way the Ukraine war plays out in that is that the idealist, activist types say, oh, the Ukraine people are being abused and Putin's evil, so let's get in, let's get in there and back Ukraine. And the realist activists say, oh, this is a great way to weaken Russia and, solidify the Western alliance. So you had, and you could see that kind of bipartisanship in supporting, backing Ukraine. Uh, but on the other side of it, the idealist, low-profile types say, "Hey, it was America's fault that this war happened in the first place. We goaded Russia into it by threatening to bring Ukraine into NATO," or they go back to the 2014 revolution and America's role in that. So the idealist, low-profile types are against America. They're against America in general, I think. And then you have the realist, low-profile types, sort of, why is this any of our business? Why are we putting American money into this? But those people are not. So neither the idealist, low-profile types nor the realist low-profile types have much sway in our actual foreign policy. So I don't know if that helps describe our teams or tribes on that
Yeah, that's
topic.
good. I think I'm in the third category. I have some idealism, but I think that I'm probably somewhere between the third and fourth, I guess. I feel that the geography is such. Nobody's really necessarily interested in my opinion on this, but here I am. Where the Urals, act as a natural barrier, and Russia's Western Front is somewhat barricaded that way, and Ukraine is really underneath that, and it's basically just like Nebraska between Kiev and Moscow, and that's that. It's like you all of a sudden Ukraine, which is not part of NATO. I think we overpromised Ukraine in order to de-nuke them back, around late '90s, and which is all well and good, but we didn't do the same with Russia, and the Ukraine was, I guess, anticipating a greater level of aid and whatnot, but there's no formal treaty beyond that one. And then to kind of, I think the NATO proposition is an odd one because, what is NATO anyway? I mean, NATO was there to protect against the Soviet Union. I don't really think, Russia. I know that people have a list of all the places Russia has gone into, but I mean, a lot of them were as the Soviet Union, and not many of them have been as Russia, aside from its own, kind of near neighbor. I mean, Chechnya, whatever, kind of under their direct sphere of influence, or parts of their actual federation still. But I see it as a hugely provocative aspect, and whether this kind of Sudetenland aspect, of annexing, attaching Russophilic parts of the country. I mean, I don't know. I think there's some rationale either way. I mean, I don't think the peoples are that different to begin with, the Ukraine and Russians, but I'm sure they would argue today. But it just seems like there were ways of getting around this. I think that it was inflamed by kind of Joe Biden's kind of quisling attitude in Afghanistan. Just laying down, bending over, and sacrificing billions in armaments there. And I think, kind of made a provocative mood. So, I mean, I think we need to have some strength. We need to project strength, but we can't use it all the time. And if we're going to use it on behalf of quote unquote NATO, whatever that is, then we have to make sure that the people who are there, participate. It seems like they can't quite, we've pretty much made them so dependent on us that, they've outsourced their defense budget to us, and they get all the socialized medicine basically on our backs because we pay their defense budget. And it just seems like we have spoiled kids over there. And if they care that much, then they should, ante up a little bit. So I'm a little bit Trumpian on that aspect. And just one more thing, my older son, he has a couple of podcasts, and one of them is the Ukrainian Pravdcast, like Pravda, Pravdcast. And they have an episode that came out yesterday, day before, and they're kind of in the first or second camp there, the idealist. What's the one, high profile? Or what did you call it?
Yeah, activist.
Activist. Thank you. Idealist activist. They want more for Ukraine because Ukraine's doing the right thing, and they go, our efforts, HIMARS and whatnot. HIMARS gets high marks over there, and a little bit goes a long way, and we're doing everything we should to provoke them. And we managed to inflict more casualties and whatnot on the Russian side per capita, 5-1, whatever, and Russia will bend, et cetera, et cetera. And the Kursk incursion shows how powerful this can be. But what's the end to this? I don't know. I just don't really see the point. I think it's been a little bit of an odd engagement, which is I think it's already coming out to kind of bite us in the butt in certain ways. Anyway, this wasn't the Ukraine show, but I don't know if you have any last words on that.
No, I think we've laid out kind of the sort of contrasting points of view, and I put myself way on the realist side of the realist idealist thing, but I also tend to lean more toward the low profile side, not because I don't think America should be assertive. I just think that a lot of times, I guess I have this libertarian prejudice that the same government that I think is kind of clumsy and awkward domestically is kind of even more clumsy and awkward when it tries to do something overseas.
Shocking.
Yeah.
So maybe we could have a debate about the debate. Since I'll show your book in a second, but you have a book on the language of politics, I guess. And have we had a presidential debate ever since Lincoln Douglas? And what do you think of the debates that go on? How would you fix them? When I say fix them, I don't mean like Donna Brazile fixes a debate.
Yeah.
I mean fix the concept of the debate. And did we have a debate recently? And how what did you get from that? And what are the topics being debated?
Okay. Well, full disclosure, I didn't watch the debate, and didn't even
watch the first one, the Biden debate.
No, I was okay. So both of these happened on folk dancing nights. So I don't.
They should have consulted with you first. Probably.
Yeah. I don't. So I passed on both of them. I remember listening to a little bit of the Biden thing in the car on the way home, and I mostly heard Trump talking. I thought, oh God, this is horrible, and had no concept that Biden had basically, committed Harry-Carry online. So I'll say that. But you asked me, what would a debate look like? Well, you know something about chess. There would just be two chess clocks with time limits, and when the guy's finished speaking, he hits his clock, and each of them have their time limits, and that's it. No moderators, no nothing, and that's that's what a debate should look like. They can do whatever they want. They can shout, curse, talk classical Greek, whatever they want to do. They just hit their
Well,
chess
actually,
clock.
Boris Johnson could do the latter. So could Bill Weld. Um,
Yeah.
Similar types, by the way. They both were pretty good with those ancient languages. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. There's no way that Kamala would agree to that. I don't think. But I like the chess clock concept because I mean the chess clock was a really revelatory thing. I spent a couple years in the '80s zipping off to Harvard Square chess tables and a chess club downtown Boston, and the chess clock really had was a way of refining what you have to do, how you could spend your time, and the economics. I guess economics, was basically the I kind of study the household, I guess, oikos or something. Anyway, but
Yeah.
you have the economics of how to apportion your time. You have to really figure it out. People get on kids these days for gaming so much, but what they do have is they have kind of that mental chess clock. They have to parse and figure out where they're going to spend their time and efforts, and it's oftentimes multidimensional aspects. I mean, I can't keep up with all the games that are out there, but where are you going to spend your time and how do you spend it? It's an interesting concept. I like that idea. I mean, you should put that out there. Have you seen a chess clock debate? Has that ever happened?
Not that I know of.
Have you written on that?
No, I may have tossed off a sentence just like I tossed off here.
Yeah, well, that's a good proposal. I like that. I might, unfortunately, it's recorded, so I can't officially steal it.
Well, go ahead, run with it. You can run with it.
Yeah. So we're rounding out the hour. I'm going to pop up your book. So what are the take-home messages? So we kind of talk about misinformation and whatnot. How does one get information these days? I suppose there are two types of people. There are two types of people. There are people who fall into groups, fall into categories, and people who don't fall into categories. There's an old joke. But I do think that you put everything kind of nicely in your book about the three types of people. But I think what's missing in a sense is that those three types of people have different innate categories or characteristics about whether they want to pursue knowledge or not. I think that the joke about people falling, there are two types of people fall into groups and people who don't fall into groups. I think that is almost literally true. They think the Democrats are people who fall into groups. They are happy to fall into groups, and the Republicans are, tends to be more like herding cats. They want to not be in groups. They want to be more individualistic. And I see it a lot on the local politics fronts. The Republicans, they can't, they all want individuality, all want freedom, which is hard to anneal and make a kind of a battalion. And the Democrats are very good at that. They're willing to sacrifice their ideas, whatever they happen to be, as long as they're part of a group. And their power is from being in a group. Their ideas can mutate all the time. It's almost like we've always been at war with
East Asia,
whatever. And then it's like 2 + 2 = 5. They're okay with that. Men can become women. Men, you're born with it, or you can decide what you want. It doesn't really matter what the theories are, as long as we're all there together protesting. It's kind of like being part of a mosh pit or a concert. I mean, I think everyone, for their ideal, they all think they want to go to a desert island and be by themselves. But what people are happiest apparently is when they're all like tightly pushed together. They're at a concert lighting a match or waving together or screaming. There's kind of a big kind of lemming cohesion that is animalistic, I guess. And I think that the problem with these different languages is assuming that other people want to have a discourse and debate, as I kind of intimated above. Anyway, so how does one get knowledge? Again, this is of the subgroup who actually wants to get knowledge.
Yeah. So just some of the things you said triggered, like I was bicycling the other day and I saw this, very professionally done sign. Obviously, there are many copies of them. It said, Harris Walls, when we fight, we win. I thought, well, there's a nice unifying slogan. I mean, it doesn't really bode well for that. But the point is that it's very easy to unify the Democrats, and it's not easy to unify Republicans. I think I think that's kind of true. I think that um, I would compare it or analogize it to sort of mainstream economics, or if you will, mainstream medicine versus heterodox. So the heterodox people, just by their nature, are sort of contrarian, and they don't get along with each other. And the mainstream people, by their nature, are going to get along with each other. So there's this kind of a natural asymmetry between sort of mainstream and heterodox, and that's how part of how mainstream kind of dominates. And in that kind of uh, framework, the Democrats are kind of always inherently mainstream, and Republicans are inherently heterodox. And so you're trying to, on the Republican side, get people to get along who don't really get along. And but the three languages story is more that the way people get along in any tribe is by demonizing the other tribes. So what I call these three languages are just axes of demonization. So for progressives, the demonization axis is oppressor oppressed, and that I wrote about that 10 years ago. It may have seemed odd. Now everyone's has pointed out, especially after October 7th, that the way progressives are able to defend Hamas is to take this oppressor oppressed framing and apply it there. It's claiming that Israel is an oppressor and Palestinians are oppressed. So the progressive will demonize their opponent as being on the side of the oppressor. You're a racist, you're a sexist, whatever. Conservatives, it's civilization versus barbarism. So when Netanyahu spoke to Congress, I'd say within a minute he was talking about we're defending civilization against barbarism. So they'll demonize their opponents as barbaric or being on the side of barbarism. And libertarians, it's liberty versus coercion. They'll demonize other people as being coercive, wanting to use government power to rule over other people. So that's kind of the essence of those three languages. But the point of the book is the tribal psychology that's behind using these for demonization purposes, even though they aren't. We'd all agree that we don't like oppression, we don't like barbarism, we don't like coercion, but each tribe sort of takes ownership of, no, we own this oppressor oppressed thing. You guys are actually on the side of oppressors, or we own civilization barbarism. You're on the side of the barbarians, or we own liberty coercion. You're on the side of the statists. So, and how do you get at truth? That's like I say, that's a tough one to ponder. How to get the institutions to function so that there's enough contestability that heterodox thinking can get a fair shot, but there's enough. You still end up with a reasonable consensus when all is said and done. So you don't get to the point where you have to say whatever the mainstream says is wrong.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope people pick up your book and follow you on your Substack. My last words will be one of self-promotion. I want people, if they want to help support my work here, Videocast, they can go buy my book, which has nothing to do pretty much with anything we've said so far. It's called Overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. I suppose if I were to make a segue to that, it would be about information, misinformation. There's kind of a zombie effect of things that get said loudly enough that are refutable, but don't get refuted because people just assume they're there. They're part of the landscape. We look out, we see a tree. We don't really question it. It's a tree. You could probably put a fake tree up there and people would walk by it and not really know. In this case, Zika was the biggest, world pandemic to that point. It's dwarfed now by that one from a few years ago. I forget what it's called, COVID. But to that point, I mean, Brazil put out 250,000 troops on the streets. Businesses were kind of closed temporarily. There's a lot of uproar and upheaval. The WHO aligned physicians told that part of the world to stop having children completely till there was a Zika vaccine. Fortunately, people with their own common sense didn't entirely listen, but the birth rate did go down. In Brazil, the left brought injunctions pro-abortion, try to overturn some. The Latin America has some of the remaining strictest anti-abortion statutes on record, and so this was a vehicle, kind of a Trojan horse for other ideas. So it kind of stuck around, and because it had the ZPG aspect, zero population growth, it aligned with some left-leaning sensibilities. And the good Dr. Fauci took money from cancer, diabetes, and other types of medical research and put the chips on the table towards Zika, a little bit like the Ukraine stuff, where you kind of push, you make it happen on the ground, and then the money's going to come later. And so that was because people were kind of holding off on the on appropriation for Zika because of the abortion aspect. There was a left-right issue here. At any rate, it got passed, and since then there's a whole Zika industry, and they're working on a vaccine. Didn't show up, but it will. But the whole thing is that there's actually no there there, and in the Gertrude Steinian sense. Although actually Oakland is there, but in her example, but in my example, Zika is a real dengue virus, and microcephaly is a real but rare congenital abnormality. Just one has nothing to do with the other, and it has disappeared, and nobody can explain why it's disappeared, and they keep looking for it. But the fact of the matter is, they're just looking in a wrong kind of way. Nobody has gone at the base of it, and I spent the whole kind of nearly part of a year researching what actually went down in Brazil at the time. It's a fascinating story. So it's not one I expected to write ever, but there it is. And so I recommend people go buy it and just pop it up one more time. It's on Amazon. It's got a good Kirkus review. It's out in Brazil as well. So if you read Portuguese, you can buy it on the Portuguese version. Anyway, thank you, Arnold, for being on. Any last words?
No, just, that is... your Zika story is appropriate to this issue of sorting out information when the mainstream the mainstream process isn't working right. There isn't the right give and take and the right contestability of ideas.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate that, and maybe we can trade signed copies.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.